Hello, and thank you for downloading this episode. Unfortunately, the sound quality on this episode is absolute shit. It is even worse than we normally sound. I'm very sorry. It is something that we will fix in the future, but unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot I could do about this episode. Sorry. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Hayley.
I'm Jordan.
Amina.
Kyle.
Beth.
And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And our topic today will be picking up the pace, getting more done in a game session. And before we actually begin this conversation, I want to say two things. To my fellow players sitting here around the table, even though I will mention some things that you actively do that slow down this game that we play, know that every single one of my examples are things that I have seen from multiple players over the past almost 20 years that I've been gaming. So please do not take anything I say personally.
I'm already offended.
The other thing I want to say is to my listeners, do as I say, not as I do. I do not always follow my own advice on this topic, and this is something that I have struggled with over my many, many years, and I'm still trying to figure this all out. Does anybody else have any caveats or warnings they want to put at the beginning of this?
We're all millennials here, even Clayton.
I was really sad to find out that I'm actually a millennial.
Wait, really?
I listened to the podcast the other day, and I'm right at the cutoff. I was born in 80. I did not realize.
Wait, is that what I thought? What about the 90s? I thought millennials was only 2000s.
You're wrong.
Well, no, because nobody here or that you know was born
That's what I
past
was
2000.
saying. It didn't
It's-
make sense to me.
It has more to do with when you came of age.
Oh, got it.
I've thought about this topic, and I kind of want to break this down as to things that can be done in combat and things that can be done out of combat, because those are two completely different areas with completely different ways of going about it, and what works in one absolutely will not work in the other. And for the overall session, I want to get started with one of the things you can do is start when you say you're going to start. Try not to hem-haul around. Everyone try to show up on time. Actually get started whenever you say you're going to get started. If you're going to have like a lot of out-of-character chatter, just catching up on what people have been doing for the past few days or week or however long it's been since the last time you were all together, try to set the time aside before you even get started to get that done. With our current game that we're playing on Thursdays, our start time is at 7, but we almost never get started before 8. And that's something that we kind of all implicitly agreed upon, that first hour is just going to be us standing around bullshitting, eating, doing other things that are not directly related to the game.
I think that's a really good point to bring up. The way that I would always try to see it is run like you're on theater time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. So give yourself around like 15 minutes to leave the house, or if you know that you're gonna hang out with your friends and talk, be like, hey, let's grab some food earlier, and then at this time, we will start the game. So giving yourself some sort of pseudo schedule could be super helpful for you and your other players.
So you're saying that our current group here runs on punk time?
Yeah.
Punk show starts at 7, no music's going to start until 9, let's be honest.
7 is when the instruments are going to get set up.
Yeah.
Well, like, would we have it any other way? Let's be real.
I mean, yeah. I would have it otherwise. I'm just as guilty of this, but man, it sure would be nice to start on time.
Do as I say, not as I do.
I mean, case in point, here we're not going to get this podcast over with for another, I predict, hour and 10 minutes. We'll see if I'm correct, listeners. And we're not going to have, more than, maybe a solid hour and a half to play Eclipse phase, and that's a bummer.
Oh.
And it's my fault. I'm my own worst enemy. It's no surprise to me. Again, I have people living shit out of me. Smoke alarm is going off, and there's a cigarette. Still burning.
Oh, I think that's living shit out of me.
Whatever. You would know Sum 41, wouldn't you?
That's not some 41, that's
Lit.
lit.
Could you? Shade.
God, my eyes got wide when I realized I could correct you. I was so excited.
Segue into my next point. Rein in out of character chatter during session.
That was a good bait you did there.
You're welcome.
Thoroughly embarrassed.
How did you say about doing that?
Don't do it.
Oh, but friends!
Fuck friends.
What?
You're here to play a goddamn game, and you're here to get shit done. Anytime some
Fun
friend
is
goes
not
on,
allowed in this game.
anytime some friend goes on a tirade about stupid band lyrics or some other nonsense, you need to shut him down hard.
A lot of this falls on the game master, I think, to kind of get people's heads in the game.
You gotta get your head in the game?
No.
You would say.
Shut down. In all seriousness, I think that a lot of people would look at sports as something that's fairly serious, and you're there to run up and down the pitch or whatever you do in a sport. Stick the wickets. I don't know, but you're there to accomplish a goal, and you're there to train or to compete, and you're there to show good sportsmanship. You're not there to bullshit and delay the game with bullshit, and that you're not there to be on your fucking phone, and then here comes a pop-up fly ball that you miss with your mitt and other things. You're there to play the damn game. I think if a lot of people looked at RPGs like they did, weekend soccer with your friends or whatever the fuck you do, a lot more would get done. Especially the distraction and the most importantly, I think, which I guess is a segue into my big one, is the just be there, be in the game. You're at the table, you're at the basement couch circle, wherever you play, you're in the coffee shop. You're not there to be on your damn fucking phone. You're not there to be on your fucking laptop doing homework. You're there to play the game. So play it. If this were a sporting match, that would not be tolerated.
The phone thing drives me crazy. And mainly because a lot of times somebody who's on their phone, whenever it gets their turn, they say, okay, what's going on? Catch me up. So now you've got an extra, because the big thing about paying attention during others' turns is so you don't need events retold, so that you're kind of also thinking about, especially during combat, what you're going to be doing next.
Yes, Queen, preach.
So that the game master doesn't have to explain the scene 6 times in one in-game 6-second interval.
Right.
And even if you think you're paying attention, and then you go to play, and 4 of the party members are dying, and you're the healer, and you're like, oh yeah, I shoot my crossbow at that ogre, and everyone around the table is just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it punishes everybody
Yeah.
else. Yeah, it's not just
I
you
used to
that-
be pretty guilty of being on my phone the entire time, and it's just more fun to not be on your phone during the game. Really glad that I stopped doing that.
because you're able to follow the story, and I think where it comes from is the whole idea of people think they can multitask, and you really can't. The research that's been done on it, what you're really doing is switching rapidly back and forth between 2 or more tasks. You're not really multitasking in your brain. I think that maybe it would be possible if somebody, say, was just looking at pictures to listen to the game at the same time, but most of the time people are reading things in their phone, they're texting, and you just can't. Your brain just
Candy
can't
Crush.
your brain just can't do 2 streams of the same type of information at the same time.
I've had people in a role-playing group, in a role-playing table, at a game, they are actively typing and responding in a role-play chat
Oh my
with
god.
a different group.
Wow.
Yeah. That's my big pet peeve. One that I do try not to be guilty of. Being on time, then shoot me.
To some degree, you can moralize about this and say, people have some social obligation to pay attention or whatever, but there's also a structural context to the timing of the play that affects what's going on, and people's psychology is, working within this framework. And so one thing that I was thinking of about this, the way that, specifically in combat, you could also structure out a combat discussion this way, the way that you do initiative or turn order has a lot to do with people's attention spans and their ability to plan based on what they've been following and retain what people have been doing. So like in games that have a static turn order, especially when it's physically represented that, you know, start at Beth and go clockwise around the table, that's a whole lot easier for people to process and, you know, be able to predict and all that sort of thing than a randomized turn order where you have no idea who's going to be next, you don't know where you're at in the ring, and so you just tend to wander off, you know, to whatever distractions around. So I think that there's some stuff in rules that can, you know, compensate for the human tendency for your mind to wander, and there's also stuff you can do in just the way that you structure the conversation and character as well.
Yeah, I really like, because Clayton, I think, said it was your idea in Abena to, whenever we deal out the cards to determine initiative order, that we start, you know, with the highest, you know, clockwise, as opposed to going in the order.
Actually, this, like, you were the first person I ever played with who did a round robin initiative. It's advice I had heard before, but I'd never actually used it. And whenever you were running Apocalyptia, you always just did round robin. Going around the same initiative order, just it might change who starts the round. And that's something that I adapted for our current Savage Worlds game. And this could be used in any sort of game where initiative is randomized. Dungeons and Dragons or any other, like World of Darkness, where you do initiative like you normally do, but whoever has the highest initiative, they go first. And that still kind of, it tones down, but it still does preserve the person who really dumps a lot of their stuff into being first. Particularly in Dungeons and Dragons, like feats like improved initiative or just having a high dex that impacts your initiative, or Savage Worlds where the highest card goes first. And then if you're doing it every round, it does change who starts things off. So it is still possible that, for instance, the game master could still get 2 immediate turns right in a row due to initiative if in the previous round he was the last to go, but then in the next round he ended up getting top initiative.
I mean, the thing is, there's really only 2 parties in conflict. It's the group versus whatever the DM is representing, and very rarely does it ever matter which player character goes before which other one. There should be a mechanism to do that if it is important opposed dexterity rolls or something like that, but yeah, I mean, generally it's us versus you.
Especially in the case when you can also, like most games, you can hold your turn until somebody else acts, and it just really, there's not a huge point in the whole thing.
Do you guys, I don't know how many of you guys ever played the old World of Darkness system, but they tried something that seemed innovative at the time that I think is kind of disastrous. In computer science parlance, the way that we typically handle turn order is as a queue, and that is that, you know, you process each action as it happens. You know, one person does something, that stuff resolves, the next person, like that. The old World of Darkness system tried to do it in what computer science calls stack, where the first person puts their action on this stack, and then the second person, and the third person, and then it resolves in reverse order. And every time I played in a game where people used that, it was a clusterfuck. It sounds great for a computer processor to do, but it is disastrous.
Can you give an example? Because I'm not entirely following what you mean.
So it would be like, rather than the person with the highest initiative going first, the person with the lowest initiative would declare their action, and then the next slowest person would know what the slow person's going to try, and so then they could respond to that. And the advantage of being the fastest is that you already know what everyone else is going to try to pull, and so you can work with perfect information.
Oh.
And then it resolves, not exactly like a stack, but that's the way that the player declaration and then kind of the system mechanic processing of it worked. It was really weird and extremely slow.
Because you had to literally go through initiative twice.
Yeah.
And that's kind of crazy.
And you might know what somebody's planning to do, but you don't know what the actual outcome of their actions are going to be.
Right.
I like that if it were a very PvP kind of game. I think if people wanted to tolerate the slowness of that, it could be interesting. But then again, maybe I'm falling into the trap of, well, that sure does sound cool in theory.
People wanting to tolerate the slowness of it has nothing to do with people's actual ability to tolerate the slowness of it.
Yeah.
And Old World of Darkness is a lot more PvP than like, fantasy role-playing games or something like that. Everybody's, out for their own agenda or whatever, so it's entirely likely you can have regular inter-party fights.
And everything is an opposed roll. Attack is an opposed roll. Damage is an opposed roll.
Oh my god.
It's very possible, in fact it's likely, that they were using that system because the one time that I've LARPed was an Old World of Darkness LARP. And holy fucking shit, did combat take 80,000 years.
Is it the rock, paper, scissors system?
Yeah.
Known back theater?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I recall the one interesting thing I did this game, the Dragon Con actually, is I triggered combat by walking up to this person that I assumed was person. No, it was like someone who had been playing the LARP for years, and they had all kinds of high-level stupid bullshit. And I'm just like, a hoo-doo-doo, hello there, hello! And he fucking, has double-barrel shotguns in his vampire arms and, pulls them out and just all 4 barrels into my chest, and I go flying backwards, and then the whole room is just like, combat! And it takes an hour and 15 minutes to resolve a room full of 20 people doing this.
That's
it was a fun experience, but I bet you it was that system, and I was literally just laying there on the floor like, what is happening? Why am I here? I could be seeing some horrible steampunk band right now.
You brought up the number of players. That's another huge problem. The fastest thing you can do to speed up your game is to play with less people.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking it up before the podcast, and when you talk about the time it takes to perform tasks, like in computer science, when you're talking about algorithm performance and you want to figure out what the worst case possible scenario is for your algorithm to do a particular process, you use this thing called big O notation to figure out how many additional elements, or as you put in additional elements, how that affects how long it takes stuff to work. And I was right when I looked it up. Assuming that every player needs to have some working knowledge of what all the other players have done in a combat round or a discussion or whatever, it's big O in squared notation. So basically every additional player increases how much time it takes everything to happen by the square of how many players that there are. So,
oh wow.
Yeah, so when you go from, let's say 3 players to 4 players, you're paying a big price for that. And when you get up to 8, 10, however many, your top end huge group is, it's a wonder that you get more than a single scene done in a session. And I think we've all seen that play out in, real world practice. But yeah, I think you're being a nice guy by letting in that, 7th or 8th straggler, but you're actually significantly impacting the sheer quantity of fun that can be had by everyone involved.
In the herd, if you would all check the bottoms of your drinks, you will see a red dot. I've added a drop of hemlock to your beverage. Congratulations, you've been chosen.
So it sounds like we've already gone into talking specifically about combat. Something that I try to do whenever I'm game mastering, we're playing Savage World, so very often I am playing groups of bad guys because there's no one single enemy I could throw against any group that is not going to be annihilated in less than maybe 2 or 3 character actions. Whenever I have multiple enemies, or if I'm playing a character, if I have multiple rolls that I know I'm going to be making in a round, such as making an attack and a damage roll those at the same time. So whenever I'm game mastering, I have in my bag 4 d20s, and I roll in clusters of 4 for my enemies. So, for instance, Jordan, if it was your turn and you had 3 enemies attacking you, so I would roll all 3 of those enemies attacking, tell you what the numbers are, find out what your parry is, and then I would know how many damages I had to roll. Whenever I'm a player, I try to do the same thing for attack and damage. in D&D, I know I'm rolling a D20 for my attack, and I know that if I hit, I'm going to be rolling for a longsword a D8. So I would roll a D20 and a D8, and if my 20 is a hit, great. I already have my damage dice rolled for that. So, I mean, it only takes a few seconds to pick up a die and roll it, but that's a few seconds that I'm shaving off by combining that into a single action.
That kind of goes with one of the things I had to know, like, how your spells and abilities work, so that you don't have to always be looking them up. And especially for something you don't use as often, like, it's helpful to kind of, like, to do a quick review of your character before each session, so that you kind of know what Clayton was talking about, the different die types that you're going to use, so that you know... can't talk. Know your spells and abilities before. Say something else about it. I can't think right now.
Well, I've watched you select your dice for the session, and you only get out the dice that you are going to roll for the session. Right. In our Savage Worlds game, you pick out your attack die for your shooting, and I don't even know if you pick out your melee attack roll, your fighting roll, just because...
I don't ever do that.
How many fighting attack rolls have you made this entire 24-session campaign? Like, maybe 2?
But it also overlaps, like, that die type overlaps with a lot of the other die types, because in Savage Worlds you're not using, like, a ton of different die. So I do get, I have a D4, 2D6 for damage, a D8, and a D10, because those are the types that I'm using right now. And then eventually, I'll probably have a D12, like, in that mix, but I like to just have them, go ahead and have them ready so I don't have to go digging for them whenever I need them.
Clayton, how do you feel about players rolling their attacks and damage ahead of time?
How ahead of time? Like, are you talking, like, I announce initiative and we, like, everybody rolls right then, and this just when I come to you, you tell me? Or are you talking, like, everybody give me a list of a bunch of rolls that we're going to use this session?
Oh, I didn't mean, like, in advance of the given turn. I meant, like, I guess even within, like, a single turn, you could do it a couple ways. You could theoretically have everybody in the table already go ahead and do their thing, but it depends on if the game system resolves actions individually or if it waits till the end of the round to tally up all the damage on everybody. Because if Hayley's attack might kill someone that I might have targeted, it's variable, it's constantly changing. If you had, like, the player who's going to be just next already have their thing ready, in the conversation where that gets relayed to be, and Nina's rolling her die for the next thing. But I don't know. There's also the healthy distrust for cheaters that comes into play. I rolled a crit like 5 minutes ago, and I've just been waiting to drop this thing.
Well, I kind of feel like there's maybe a lot of drama that could be lost by rolling ahead of time, because, I mean, definitely, there's that, like, kind of, like, reaction that you get when you roll a die that explodes, or a natural 20 or something like that, that I think it maybe wouldn't be as fun if you had already done it beforehand and you knew it was coming.
But how much of that drama comes from just the slogging away at the big monster's hit points? Like, there's usually a point where that roll is key. It's usually the killing blow or whatever. But if you're just in the 3 or 4 rounds it takes to wear the guy down to that critical, last 10% of his hit points.
Yeah, that's true.
I think all of these methods are bad mojo. I roll 1 die at a time, and I wait for the result, and I say it, and I wait for confirmation.
Wait. And you haven't calculated anything out on your character sheet ahead of time. You haven't added all your numbers together. You have to do that each time. Like, you have to calculate, my attack bonus is a +3, and then I have a +2 in my strength, so that makes it a +5.
Well, my weapon gives a +1.
Because it is masterwork, your weapon gives a +1. And you also have the weapon focus, so you get an additional +1, which so far we're up to a +7. But we also have the flanking bonus that you're getting, so you get an additional +2, so that's a +9. We literally played with somebody who did this every goddamn time.
That's strict out, guys. No, I 100% do that in Eclipse Phase, though, because it's just so much.
Eclipse
So
Phase is a little
many
new for
numbers.
all of us. It's
Yeah.
very complex, good word.
Well,
They
there's
don't do the order of operations correctly.
No.
They're showing you how you're supposed to add things up and divide them, guys. Parentheses. You've got to use some parentheses occasionally.
but my example was like all things that are on the sheet. You know you're going to get them every single time. You know
you
before
just don't
you
have your blocks filled in,
Right.
basically.
But like where Eclipse Phase, a lot of the modifiers are like situational modifiers that we're not going to know until we start to roll.
Also, at Eclipse Phase, for getting stuff done, why does there need to be an order of operations anyway? Like, it's stressful anytime you need to calculate something.
That's a good point.
Just add things. My God.
I guess the general advice is be better at math, or if you're not like me, have a calculator handy.
Play a simpler system.
Yes. Have the math done ahead of time.
But transhumanism space.
The most convoluted die roll technique I've ever seen a player use was when I first started playing D&D back in the day, and we all kind of had a hunch that this player was a cheater, but to my knowledge, nobody ever caught him red-handed. And his method was, let's say he's rolling a d6 for damage. He would roll the die, and just as soon as the die stops, he would put his hand down on it, and then pick it up and look at the opposite side number. And he said that what he did was, he was taking the die type plus 1 and subtracting the number he saw to know what the opposite side number was.
Why?
There was no explanation as to why this fucker did this, except that he's, throwing up an ink cloud so he can name any high number that he wanted, basically. But he did this on every fucking roll he ever made.
You almost had me at roll the die, and as soon as it stops, snatch it up and look at the opposite side. Like, that's still a random number.
Yeah.
It's a weird way of doing it. I guess it's flair. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with flair. But then, what did you fucking say? The die type plus 1 minus that number?
Okay, on most dice, if, like, a standard dice, the 6 is opposite the 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you take whatever the die type is, plus 1, so in this case for a d6 it's 7, you look and see that you've got a 6, subtract 6, your result was a 1. That works on any die that's like standard. It doesn't work for like magic spin down dice or whatever, but yeah, and the only thing that any of us could ever figure out that actually lent him was some obfuscation. Some
That's the ability to fudge
like,
the number, yeah.
I would just assign somebody to make his rolls for him. You've lost your die privileges.
Like, that's equivalent to, like, sitting on your hand and then masturbating.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same result, but it's really fucking dumb.
And as soon as he looked at the number, he just kind of cast his die aside, so completely obliterating any record of what happened.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Would you not murder this person?
I couldn't stand him.
I have very little patience for shit like that.
So, Jordan, your original question about whether or not, how I felt about rolling ahead of time. Most of the time, it goes back to planning ahead, and most players don't plan ahead. They don't plan ahead more than a turn ahead of time. Even if we're doing round robin, I don't think it is incumbent upon the player to think more ahead than like when they're on deck.
Mm-hmm.
I would be okay if they rolled it when they knew they were on deck and they had already heard from the other player that they're not going to attack the same target. So whatever happens with that other target, it's not going to have any effect on what they roll.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be fine with that. Mostly because I trust everybody who we currently game with. If I played with somebody who I didn't trust, no, that wouldn't fly.
Clayton, you fool.
Yeah, it just seems like if you can figure out how to like multitask the players a little bit, like the GM is the bottleneck, right? They're the arbiter of reality, and they're the only one whose opinion ultimately matters in what's real. But if you can, distribute tasks in a staggered way, you can have more people engaged and bored for a shorter period of time, giving less opportunity for them for their minds to wander or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of arbitrary to say that it's your turn, so you're the only one on deck. You could just as easily say, and next player, you gotta have your shit ready.
Like, if you're doing a round robin, you absolutely, unless you're the top of the initiative, you absolutely know who's going to go before you. You know how much time you're going to have before your turn starts up. So that's when you have power to go ahead and do things ahead of time, decide what you're going to do. But it's my experience that the vast majority of players they don't start thinking until Game Master calls on them.
The thing that just occurred to me, being a guy who runs a lot of like survival horror kind of games, depending on what kind of game you're running, you're going to want a different kind of tempo for the overall feel of the game. And what you were talking about, like having that big epic attack that's dramatic with your crits or whatever, I think that's the kind of thing that you see a lot more in fantasy games where, all right, here's the big thrust into the dragon's heart or whatever, that kind of thing. For that, I could see turn-by-turn actions resolving themselves like that. But if you're doing something where, people are running from a zombie horde and they're stumbling over each other and just everything's real messy and it's just split-second decisions and people are fucking up and just trying to stay ahead and all that, then I could see something where you're kind of putting the hammer down, like, you got 5 seconds to tell me what you do or you're froze, like something like that. There's something about the real world structure and pacing of how the rules play out that is going to translate into people's perceptions of what the characters are experiencing as well. So, I don't know, I guess it depends on what you're doing. And, if you're playing like a Star Trek game or something, you might want to take a long time to figure out what the fuck's going on your tricorder or whatever.
I think that's something I've seen DMs use to good effect inside and outside of combat. If your group of players are interacting with someone who has just been poisoned, and it's a fast-acting poison, and they have very little time on this earth, and the players are like cracking jokes, and they're not quite sure what they're doing, and like no one's really talking, and meanwhile you, the DM, are sitting there like, this dude's dying. You could do it one of two ways. You could be a giant dick and just be like, well, he's dead. And the players are like, what? No, he didn't do anything. He's dead now. You just bullshitted. He's dead. Good job. But I think a better way of doing it would be to say, like, okay, everyone, I'm going to put a timer on you. Clayton, you've done that before. Like, just let them know this is a time crunch. Whatever you do is happening in real time in the game. So don't waste it. Go.
Yeah, nothing motivates people like a time limit. Our most recent Abena game, where you guys had the coins that allowed you to ask the questions of the dead for 5 minutes. Once you guys knew, oh crap, we only have 5 minutes. Like, even before you put the coin in its mouth, you were on task, figuring out what you were going to say, and you guys didn't hem-haw around that at all. You got right to it, just knowing that there was some sort of time limit. Even if the time limit hadn't started yet, just knowing that it existed, just put a fire under your asses.
I love that.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite things, mechanically and play-wise, that we've done in Abena. We didn't even, optimize it the best. We didn't have, a super scripted out thing, but we were just, going for volume, basically. We had general points we wanted to hit.
Something else that I've done in Abena to kind of speed things up a little bit, specifically in combat, and it's something I never told anyone that I was doing, and I started this, ironically, the very session that the character Magnus got killed. But in combat, that session, and I've been doing this since then, whenever it comes to your character's turn and you ask me what's going on, I don't tell you what all is going on. Your character has tunnel vision. You see the 3 Vikinger who are hacking at you. You see what the person you shot your arrow at last round is doing. That's all I tell you.
I haven't noticed it, but I certainly appreciate it, because you telling me what my character would see is like, okay, that means I could focus on that, and it streamlines what I can do and what I need to do.
But also, you're better off having paid attention to the entirety of what's going on, because that tunnel vision might not be the important information. Your friends could all be dying, but you've got this tunnel vision. You don't know everybody else is dying because you've been on your phone or whatever. Yeah. And then when you get that information of like, oh, this person's doing this, and then your automatic thought, metagaming kind of is like, well, that must be what's important because the DM just told me that.
Well, that's also not necessarily the case. Like, I'm also, fun fact, a really bad RPG player. The DM tells me something like, that's the law, I must do exactly that.
I'm a big fan of Fog of War. I think that in like movies and stuff like that, some of the most dramatic shit that happens is from someone's misunderstanding of what the whole picture is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, time crunches and, tunnel vision, stuff like that, that makes for awesome situations. Oh, if I'd have known that, I would have saved my buddy, but I didn't because I'm off down the hallway or whatever.
Yeah, that phrase has been uttered several times since then. Well, if I'd have known that... kind of related to... We keep going back to kind of be focused, but specifically in combat, we are really bad about, in the middle of combat, devolving into a dialogue with somebody. Where the dialogue is something that is supposed to be happening within a 6-second period of time, which is how long a round typically lasts in Savage Worlds and also D&D. And like, you could be talking for, if I didn't put the hammer down, people would be talking for 15-20 minutes during their one round of actions. Mm-hmm. I've had to just start, okay, stop. You have 6 seconds to say everything that you're wanting to say to this person.
Yeah.
And looking at my clock to count off those 6 seconds and saying, stop, you're done talking. Next person.
Do you know who's really good at optimizing 6 seconds of speaking? KD. I find that every time he speaks in combat, it's always, like, very quick, very short, and, like, he gets information out there. Like, I'm actually kind of jealous that he's so good at optimizing that dialogue.
That's one of the things that I kind of like about Eclipse Phase. Like, when we were playing it at first, it kind of chapped my ass a little bit, but when I thought about it afterwards, how you kind of have to spend an action to say anything. Like, that's cool that it's part of your action economy, and so you're gonna really streamline what you're trying to communicate. That's a nice feature.
Well, it hasn't come up because you're the only spellcaster who's consistently casting spells in combat. In Savage Worlds, it is broken down, like, essentially that the actions you have that can be done in a round are your mouth, each arm, and your legs.
So if I say, hey, Clayton, what that mouth do? You have an answer. Sorry.
KP, I'm about to pull out the hose on you.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense because every time I've been in combat, you're like, you have claws and teeth, right?
Well, I just want you to forget and bite someone and then infect them with lycanthropy.
I know, like, I can't avoid it. Oh.
Are you saying I've been passing up on free light attacks in every combat?
It would still suffer the multi-attack penalty.
Yeah.
But you can use your words or you can use your limbs, basically.
It's related to the discussion, so I'll go ahead and ask. In the Eclipse Phase game we played last, where we finally had some combat, I too enjoyed the action breakdown, but what do you guys think of the fact that we had a pretty large group, and I chose to do initiative as whoever rolls the best, I make a list, and then it bounces around the table in that order. I know we've talked about round robin and its benefits. Are there any benefits of doing things that way? What do you like about it?
I do like to plan out ahead of time what I'm going to do, and it's harder if I don't know how long I've got. I don't know who's going ahead of me. I don't know what they're going to do because I don't know what might happen ahead of me.
I did definitely like it better than rolling initiative for each round. Like, I just feel like in every game I've ever been in, I felt like that's way too much. So I didn't like it as much as round robin, but I liked it a lot more than rolling every round. Maybe
in the future you could, after we've done the initiative and it gets set, go down through so that everybody knows who's going when. That way, if we do want to know who's going ahead of us, we can jot it down.
I really enjoy the bouncing around to different characters when it comes towards story elements, So, for example, in the Eclipse phase, when we were all at different parts, I think it was really helpful. So, kind of like goes cinematically, like, okay, now we're going to jump over to this storyline and see what's going on over here. And then we're going over there and following what they're doing in their battle. And I think that's really interesting for storytelling.
I was actually going to say a similar thing where it contributed to what I like to call space chaos, where they're like, we're fighting and it's in space and it feels chaotic, and like the bouncing around contributes to that in like a really good way that I think helps the story a lot.
Yeah.
There is a cost to it. I think it was cool. I did enjoy it made us feel like we were floating in zero G and shit's going on in all directions, but there is a cost of task switching for the GM and all the players as well, which is arguably kind of the benefit as well.
I thought everyone did a great job of staying on task for that combat, even though it was long, drawn out. We had we had 2 guest players. It was big. But I thought everyone during combat did a pretty good job of staying on task, so I thought it went okay. I was happy at that.
I think if the combat had taken place in like a hallway or something, it would have not been worth it. It wouldn't have given that feel of
Space chaos.
Yeah, space chaos. That's a great term.
Thank you.
I'm gonna rip that.
Yeah, I don't.
A giant crab and an octopus just flailing around. I still have that image. I'll have that image in my head for the rest of my life.
Well, we talked a lot about combats. I was wondering about people's thoughts on how to better optimize time when discussing things, exploring the world, whatever. Right now it's kind of like a free-for-all. Whoever has a thing to say will say it. And that's not at all the best way to do things like this. It's in fact probably the worst. I don't know,
RPG is a lot different because you're doing characters rather than yourself. And when you're playing yourself, when you are doing combat stuff, it's like you'd be like, okay, so this character's gonna do that, and it's more about the dice. When it comes to role-playing systems, it's more of a character choice, and I don't think that there's any way to optimize how characters interact with each other.
You can say that the scene is going to end at whatever time you want the scene to end, because Thursday night, what I did was we were getting down toward the end of the session, and I finally had to say, okay, we're ending in 5 minutes. Wrap up this conversation. I think that whenever you get enough people sitting around the table playing a game, there's going to be somebody who is going to talk and talk and talk and talk. Going back to time limits, you have to give them a time limit. Even if it's something that in character there's not really a time limit, you have to do something to focus, to stop the players from just getting into circular arguments. Because whenever, my God, the factions game that we did, every goddamn session where we had a council meeting just became a bunch of people talking in circles.
Yeah.
You could just press all your friends to go through conflict de-escalation training.
I think we are, as a group, skewed because recently we've been playing the factions game with so many goddamn players. Our group is massive. And we make it work as well as we can. We've accomplished things. We've had a 25-session long fantasy game. Factions was, getting long in the tooth. I mean, we have had some long games that were successful. I'm trying to think of groups I've been in that have been smaller. 3 players, maybe 4 players at most. In those small groups, things like this scene will end in 5 minutes, which are great for large groups. I don't know if they're as necessary in a smaller group. It doesn't seem like you could have 3 players talk for 45 minutes and have some really cool roleplay elements coming out with these 3 people going back and forth and getting things done, because it's much less likely that 3 people will get wrapped up in a circle jerk. 3 people will get the hose. 3 people will not have half the room miss a conversation note and then come back 5 minutes later once they get off their phones to bring up something that has been discussed 5 minutes ago. I don't want to say, and Hayley, I feel like, this is chiming off what you said. I don't want to say that you should always, well, my 2 players, you've talked for 2.5 minutes, that's it, when we're talking for you, you're done. The roleplay is good and it's fun, but in a large group like ours, you have to take contingencies or else nothing's going to get done.
And I feel like the whole paying attention to what's going on is important there too. Like even if there's this little scene that's going on between like 2 or 3 players and the GM, I feel like it's a really good idea to still pay attention to that because I mean it might be that you decide that information is not, that the other players are not privy to that information, which is fine. Then it's just something extra you have to remember.
At the very lightest end, it's polite.
Right,
You know?
exactly. But also, like, if it's
Yes.
something that everybody else does get to know, then you don't have to re-explain it to everybody. And that's just not, to me, it's not fun role-playing to have to, like, summarize. It's like, you know, I'm in 4th grade and it's like, summarize this paragraph. You know? Like, it's not fun.
I will say that it is fun to have a conversation like that with the DM's NPC and me, say, and then my character comes back to the group, and I've seen you do this as a DM, Clayton. Some of the players will be like, so what'd you talk about? And the player who had the conversation, oh, you've done this too, I think. Maybe like in the Factions game, I remember somebody will look at the DM and be like, well, what did my character and your NPC talk about? DM just goes, I don't know, summarize it. And so the person's just like, okay. But I love that because that's how it would be. If you don't remember a conversation you had and you come back to report to the group, you're going to tell them a telephone, version of it that's diluted and skewed. And that's awesome. That's really cool. That leads to some of these dramatic misinformation situations that can be just so cool and so dramatic and heart-wrenching. That's what it's all about. Just collymog your players' hearts.
Outside of combat, and when it's not likely that combat is going to happen, I can't say combat's not going to happen because anyone can throw a punch at any time.
Like real life.
Yes, just like real life.
You never know when combat's going to break out.
Well, especially if you're playing with Jordan, he might just punch a fucker like
This is going to be the only time I give this advice. This is the only exception that proves the rule. But if it's a role-play only encounter, split the goddamn party. If 3 player characters are having a conversation and nobody else is privy to that, the game master can cut them off, like not physically cut them off, but kind of separate himself from them and pick the rest of the players and say, okay, this is what you guys are doing while they're having a conversation. It gets 2 conversations done at once. Another thing that I do, kind of relating to splitting the party, but just something that I do to speed up a session, is you guys do not shop during the game session. Going through the books, looking at gear. I had one player who was absolutely terrible about shopping. Like, I swear it's why they played the game, was so that they could go shopping.
Okay.
I was going to say, it's like relatable.
Is it me?
No.
I love shop.
This was many years ago. That's something I do to make sure that something actually gets done. Because when you're shopping, nothing gets done. Who cares that you've gotten a new sword? Or
I love that you don't even really give us the opportunity to shop in-game, ever.
Wait a second. Occasionally cool stuff happens. Remember when people went to, I can't remember what town it was in Albano, but some people went shopping around and it unfolded into that whole thing with the troll in the back room and all that stuff. Like, there are cool shop encounters. No, that was a planned encounter that you guys said, we want to do some shopping. So I just ported that planned encounter in there. If that encounter hadn't been there, I would have said, okay, you guys do that. Tell me what you get in next session. Well, it was a great use of the shopping scenario.
I think that a middle ground there would be allow shopping because it can result in some fun situations. But instead of somebody digging through the book and finding the exact fucking curved sword that they want, just be like, DM, I acquire a weapon while I shop. Great. But that way, if you're a really voice-heavy or NPC-heavy DM, you can still make the shopkeeper. And you can still have the players roleplay with the shopkeeper. That's always fun. A Star Wars Rhodian shopkeeper named Jufa, who ran a store called Jufa's This and That. I'll use that again someday. But just have him say, yeah, I get a weapon. Okay, great. Tell me what it is next game.
Right. I'm talking in shopping sessions where there's nothing going on relating to anything that's going on in the world. I fully embrace, taking on the role of a shopkeeper. if it's like the beginning of the campaign, you're still establishing the world.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point in Abena, if you guys wanted to go back to the to Southbrook where you guys started out, I would not roleplay any of those NPCs unless it was an NPC that you had encountered before and you specifically wanted to go back and talk to them. I would not roleplay any of that shopping trip, just because it's somewhere you've been, you've experienced it, you know what's going on there.
We are not the first people to try to figure out how to deal with the decision making on this scale. And when I was thinking about this podcast, I went back to my political organizing days, and I got this book. If you want to link to it, Clayton,
Certainly will.
it is Consensus by one Peter Gelderloos. Great name, sir. So, like, when you're in whatever kind of political group, usually it's something outside of the mainstream. Voting is not really all that great because you get a bunch of people that get dragged along that don't actually support what's happening. So the whole goal of Consensus is to, if not get everyone on board, then at least get a majority of people on board and everyone else is okay with what's going to happen. But at any point, one person or maybe two people, depending on how you do it, can block the thing, which causes more discussion to happen. But the idea is you talk back and forth in a structured way until everyone knows the facts of what's going on and everyone's voiced their thoughts about it, and people have figured out, mutually agreeable course of action. And so looking at that, I was thinking about how this would work in a role-playing game. And when you're in a consensus situation, you've got one person that's pretty much the neutral arbiter. In this case, it would be the GM, who is just sort of calling on people to see what they have to say. And people raise their hands, and you've got, you're taking a stack. That's what's happening. So people aren't talking over each other. It's not a free-for-all. And people are listening to what each other person's question is, so as to inform their question. So taking from this book, I think an optimum way of doing out-of-character stuff would be the GM presents a situation, then there would be a round of Q&A where people get clarifications where they need it, then the GM would sort of step back and the group would discuss amongst themselves in character, and out of that get a decision. There's always the emphasis on not just people getting their thoughts out there, but also identifying those things that you may disagree with, but are willing to set aside for the forwarding of the thing. And in the factions game, what I saw a lot of was people would reach some point of contention and refuse to set it aside. And they would just keep fucking bashing heads about this one stupid thing. They might agree on 90% of what's happening, but this 10% is just that's the line in the sand. I was wondering what you guys thought about a more structured way rather than just the open conversation method that we typically use of dealing with out-of-combat situations, scenes, whatever. You can adapt this to any kind of encounter among multiple people. Typically, the rules only apply to combat, but I think there's some space to have a framework with which to do the other things, to move things along as well.
My, initial reaction is, ew, no, because I'm thinking I'm not so great at talking in character, but then I'm like, maybe I would get better at talking in character if I had to. Kind of like when you're in Spanish class, you're not allowed to speak English. So, I don't know, I've got very conflicting feelings about it.
That comes up in consensus decision making. It's recognized that some people talk more and others don't, and so there's this whole idea of some people stepping forward, other people stepping back to more equalize input, and you're never obligated to say anything. The place is there if you want to take it.
How do you handle people who just by nature talk a lot and people who by nature don't? Obviously, if you see someone trying to speak and getting cut off, that's an easy one. You shut everyone else up. But do you kind of make a point of saying, so-and-so, you haven't said much, is there anything you'd like to say? Or, so-and-so, you've been speaking a lot. Can you not?
You can do that, and that's the DM's place to keep things under control. And there's a lot of use of hand signals in this stuff, so as to not talk over each other. So like I said, people raise their hands if they have a point, and then you keep track of what order people raise their hands and go down it. And people keep their hand up as long as they have a thing to say. But if their point got addressed, then they can drop their hand and opt out of their place in the stack.
Taking stats is so important to me.
It's a big deal. And another very useful hand signal is when someone's gone on for too long, you can wrap it up. Just tell somebody nicely, you get it, go on. I mean, there's a few other interrupts when the process is when some factual thing is clearly misunderstood that someone has the answer for. You can kind of jump stack and be like, here is the fact, and then go back to your discussion.
It's essentially like a group situation in which everybody has to keep everybody else in check. Checks and balances of a group. Like it's never just two people being like, I'm going to step forward and you're going to step back. It's like everybody being like, you may have talked too much, or you haven't said anything, you should talk more.
Is there a single, MC? I mean,
that's the person I was talking about who's taking stack and, doing all that stuff.
That
would be the
that's
GM's
assigned.
role.
Okay.
The conversational referee.
Cool. Interesting.
Which in game would be like the DM.
I'll definitely use that. I'll definitely give it a shot and see how it works. Whenever the conversation is wrapping up, what I'll probably do is point to each individual person who is participating in the conversation and say, once the conversation is wrapping up, say, okay, do you have any last things to add to this conversation? And make it basically a final statement. And from there, end the conversation, and if there's any further clarification that I would need, ask at that point a pointed question about it. Not get an opinion, but just get course of action, decision.
That's one of the key parts to the whole thing working well, is that it's not a broad discussion, it's about a specific topic, and you can introduce other topics to be discussed later, but you do it procedurally, one thing at a time, so you don't go off on weird rabbit trails and wind up just bullshitting for hours with no result.
So like in Abena, where is the wind tamed going?
Yeah.
No. Where is it going? No. Tell me the direction you are going to go. I just need a cardinal direction.
That's never happened.
2 days ago.
Which I don't think anyone gave an answer to.
No. No one did. I just went ahead with what I had planned.
So which direction are we flying?
That will be figured out next session.
I thought you were going to say that's none of your business.
Well,
You wouldn't be wrong.
I am the Lord Master Commander.
I cannot believe that you gave Kyle Perkins the title of Lord Master and Commander of everything. Like, you've done this to us.
I was like, what is the most pompous thing I can think of? I actually worked at it.
Zephyr are pretty pompous, I'll give you that.
So my kind of a final point that I want to have for this session, or for this topic, is that a lot of these tactics, they only work if the group wants them to work. And it's not going to happen every time. We're not, by nature, we are human, and we are not going to be focused all of the time. We're going to have sessions that are just slow in plot development. But just because it's slow in plot development doesn't mean that there's not other things that are going on that are actually important to the world. I try to make sure that in every session I have something that I'm pushing toward, whether it's a plot point or whether it's some aspect of character development. I try to dovetail in that direction whenever we play. That's basically what I have for my session notes is, what's the main thing that's going to be discussed this time? Okay, my goal is to make sure that this gets done. Going back to my point of having time limits, since we have found out that Abena is ending at the end of August, my God, that has focused everyone. More has gotten done since then than in probably the 2 months leading up to it, as far as just people wanting to go, get stuff done. And that's kind of the antithesis of what I had originally wanted with this campaign. I wanted this campaign to not have that sense of urgency, but I've inadvertently imposed it upon everyone.
It is interesting that now, when there is no in-game urgency that
Yep.
we know of,
Right.
is when it feels most urgent. Whereas the Doom fleet were all just like fucking around, going shopping, like, hey.
What a great phrases in this podcast. Space chaos.
Well, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Hooray!
Hurry up.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.